The baby monitor flickered once, went dark, then lit up with a cold blue light. The mother froze. On the tiny screen, her infant was bathed in that eerie glow, floating just inches above the crib. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked. The child vanished. Not a scream. Not a sound. Just gone. She bolted into the nursery, tore through the room, arms outstretched, hands grasping air. The window was wide open, but there were no broken shards, no breeze, no footprints in the snow below. Just her baby's soft blanket, gently fluttering on the floor like it had been folded by invisible hands. She collapsed, clutching the blanket to her chest, screaming a sound that had no shape, just pain. The alert reached NORAD before it reached the police. No one expected a baby's disappearance to trigger a Level 7 anomaly alert, but that's exactly what it did. A retired NASA astrophysicist named Greer was the first to recognize the pattern. It matched a heat and EMF signature recorded once before, 36 years ago, in Argentina, when an entire village vanished except for a single dog and an open well. Now, that signature was back, hovering over a one-story cabin in Montana. And it wasn't just a flare. It lingered. For 12 minutes. Then it vanished into the upper stratosphere. Meanwhile, far from radars and analysts, a small encrypted file arrived at a defunct server once used by the Joint Interstellar Monitoring Program, a project so buried in budget documents that even the current administration didn't know it existed. The file was simple. A single feed. Grainy, bluish in hue. Alien figures surrounded an operating table. A small body lay on it, limp, unmoving. Instruments hovered above it, slicing, scanning. Not robotic. Deliberate. Curious. One alien raised a small device and waved it over the infant's chest. A pulse of sound. Then a language. Translated crudely. The voice said, "We regret this necessary dissection. Primitive species show strong maternal bond. Conclude behavioral parameters. Dispose of specimen." The footage ended with an alien blinking into the camera, 6 eyes, none showing a trace of remorse. Within hours, that video had been decrypted and transmitted to one terminal. A remote military base in Wyoming with no official name. A place where people were assigned, not recruited. Where operatives went when they had nowhere else to go. In the lower levels of that base, behind a reinforced vault, sat a man no one liked to talk about. His file was stamped not honorable, not dishonorable, but unstable. His name was mostly redacted. Most people called him Reaper. He didn't answer to it. He didn't answer to anything. Colonel Davis was the only one willing to enter that concrete tomb. He walked past old bulletproof glass now webbed with hairline fractures, past rows of weapons not seen in any battlefield. At the far end sat a man in his 60s, wearing a tattered tank top, boots without laces, and dog tags so blackened they looked like stone. He was cleaning a weapon, something between a rifle and a relic. The colonel placed the tablet down beside him, let it play the video, and didn't say a word. The man didn't flinch. He kept oiling the barrel. He paused only once, when the voice in the video said the word dissection. That's when he stopped cleaning. He looked up. Then he stood. Davis didn't offer a mission brief. He knew better. Instead, he walked alongside the Marine in silence through corridors lined with red lights and locked doors. When they reached the armory, the colonel finally spoke. "They killed a baby," he said. The man said nothing. Just opened a locker sealed with 12 separate biometric locks. Inside it was a suit, half prototype, half myth. It had no name. But it had history. It had been designed for a man who once walked alone into a siege on Europa Prime and walked out without a scratch. That man had died. Or so they thought. Now he was standing here, suiting up. As the Marine prepared, technicians prepped a small stealth pod, the Fire Trail. It wasn't built for comfort. It was built for insertion. No return. No backup. Just a needle through the sky, slipping through every known detection field. The plan wasn't diplomatic. The plan was revenge, and everyone knew it. One technician, barely 23 and not yet jaded, looked at the Marine and said, "What are you going to do if they apologize?" The man looked up, his face unreadable, voice like dry gravel. "Then they'll get to bury their own," he said. The technician didn't speak again. In orbit, the pod aligned. Countdown initiated. The Marine didn't pray. He didn't look at Earth below. He only took one thing with him, besides his weapons. A photo. Printed on old thermal paper. A baby. Not his. Not anyone's, really. Just a stock image recovered from the footage. But he folded it carefully. Tucked it near his chest, right above his heart. As the pod launched, no one cheered. No one saluted. There was only silence, the kind that settles before a storm. Back in Montana, the mother hadn't spoken in 3 days. She sat in the nursery, lights off, staring at the empty crib. She didn't respond when the officials came. Didn't blink when they offered words. But that night, something changed. Her baby blanket began to glow faintly. A hum filled the room. It wasn't the aliens. It was something else. Something colder. A tether pulling across space. Not for study. Not for science. But for reckoning. She didn't know it yet. But Earth had sent someone. And he was already halfway there. The mission briefing was just 1 sentence long, and it wasn't even spoken aloud. It blinked into life on an old green terminal inside a room colder than space. Project Oathkeeper initiate. No formal clearance. No second opinions. Not even an acknowledgement protocol. Just a blinking command and a countdown that started ticking the moment the screen lit up. No one in the war room questioned it. No one dared. Because Project Oathkeeper wasn't about justice. It was a promise, a long-forgotten vow buried in Earth's darker playbook. A vow that if anyone from beyond the stars ever hurt a human child, there would be no court, no appeal, no trial. Only a message sent in flesh and fire. That message now had a name again. The man they called Reaper. As the facility powered up the fire trail, engineers moved with a tension that clung to their movements like wet cloth. They didn't speak above a whisper. The atmosphere was not one of awe. It was dread. They were preparing a weapon, but it looked like a man. When he walked, his boots didn't echo. He made no unnecessary noise. And when he entered the deployment hangar, everyone cleared the floor without needing to be told. He was no longer classified as active military. He wasn't even listed as reserve. His profile was deactivated 2 decades ago due to psychological nonconformance, which was a long-winded way of saying he scared the people who gave orders. They started the exosuit fitting, a grim hybrid of human engineering and alien tech from previous salvages. The torso plates were constructed from the carbon molecular structure recovered from a downed reconnaissance drone over Brazil. The inner mesh was cooled by nanofluidic veins that adapted to host body temperature. It could stop a rail round at full velocity, but it wasn't bulletproof by design. It was rage-proof. The final piece was a visor with no HUD, no targeting aid, no night vision. Just tempered glass. Because he didn't want filters between him and the ones he was going to find. While the technicians worked, the Reaper packed his own gear. He rejected standard issue and instead loaded weapons with quiet reverence. A black rifle with wood inlay, one that had seen the Gulf. A belt of sharpened throwing blades engraved with military call signs. A sidearm with an analog trigger and a crimson grip, the paint faded from what looked like years of war. There were no markings, no units, no country. Only silence. The only modern addition was a thin wristband with a pulse-reactive detonation trigger. It was linked to one thing, the fire trail's emergency core. If it looked like capture was possible, he'd take them all down with him. The shuttle itself looked like something born in a scrapyard nightmare. Small, sharp, silent. Designed to pierce orbit, it used an outdated wormhole manipulation drive so unstable it was locked down in every civilized nation. But that's why it was perfect. It couldn't be tracked. Couldn't be traced. And when it tore through space, it didn't leave a trail. It left a scar. One that other civilizations noticed too late. He stepped into the pilot pod and didn't bother sitting down. The Reaper didn't plan on comfort. He only needed direction. As the countdown hit 0, the control deck staff held their breath. Not because they feared the launch would fail, but because they feared it would succeed. The fire trail vanished with a thud of displaced air and a white-hot trail of broken physics. It was headed toward a mapped but restricted system orbiting an unlisted dwarf star. Coordinates had been buried under layers of fake astronomy files. The alien vessel that had taken the child was known to Earth's hidden files as Collector Class, Medical Drift Variant. It had never been seen in combat, only science. That assumption was about to be erased. Hours into the jump, the Reaper stood inside the containment capsule, eyes open. He didn't sleep. Not out of discipline. He simply couldn't anymore. Not after what he had seen in his last mission, the one they swore never to declassify. He looked at the photo again, the one tucked into his vest. The baby wasn't even real to him, just an image. But the violence in the photo, the arrogance behind the alien message, that was real. That burned. And it reminded him why he came back. On Earth, high above Montana, a satellite activated for the first time in years. It began transmitting a focused pulse signal into deep space. Its job was simple: to record the impact. To capture whatever signal came back from the Reaper's mission. But no one in the monitoring room expected a reply. They expected static. Ashes. And maybe, if they were lucky, a signal flare to mark the end. The man they had sent wasn't coming back to Earth. He wasn't returning with souvenirs. He was going to make sure no one ever thought about abducting another child again. Back in the military facility, the colonel watched the fire trail disappear on radar. He didn't blink. A young lieutenant beside him finally asked what no one dared. "Sir, if the Reaper succeeds, what happens next?" Davis didn't answer at first. He simply turned off the monitor and walked out. But before he stepped into the corridor, he paused. "If he fails," he finally said, "then we send something worse." The room fell into silence again. In the blackness between stars, the fire trail hurtled toward its destination. The Reaper stood still, surrounded by low hums and flickering lights. He pulled out a strip of old tape and wrote something across his own chest plate. One word. One mission. Justice. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. For every needle that had pierced innocent flesh, there would be one man who pierced back. And he was minutes away. The alien vessel floated above a dead moon, cloaked in light and cloaked in lies. It looked like a temple from a distance, all curves and harmony, glistening in a way that suggested peace, curiosity, and higher purpose. That illusion lasted until the Reaper breached the hull. He didn't enter through a door or dock. The fire trail punched a hole directly through the outer layer, its stealth field collapsing just as the ship's atmosphere pulled the edges inward to seal the breach behind him. The internal systems scrambled to respond, but by the time the alarms began to echo through the sterile corridors, he was already inside. No hesitation. No warning. No protocol. He emerged in what the logs would later call the observation garden, a room of floating mosses and translucent vines that swayed as if they were breathing. The room was warm and full of soft bioluminescent light, the kind designed to soothe anxious patients. There were no guards. No weapons. Only hovering drones silently trimming alien plants and collecting samples in jars of fluid. It didn't matter to him. Beauty built on cruelty was still cruelty. He passed through the garden without pause, boots sinking briefly into moss that pulsed beneath his steps like it knew something unnatural had just entered. Downward. That was the only direction he moved. Every corridor he chose angled him deeper into the ship's anatomy, descending into sectors less polished, less welcoming. The deeper he went, the colder the lights became, transitioning from warm yellow to sickly green, then finally to harsh surgical white. The gravity shifted in subtle ways. The sound of his footsteps returned, then faded, then came back distorted. The walls became sharper. Signs changed from flowing alien script to blocky warnings, lit in red. Sector Gray. He found it not by map, but by instinct. It smelled like ammonia and something far worse. It smelled like death hidden behind logic. 2 alien doctors were in the middle of a dissection when he arrived. They were tall, spindly, with 4 arms each and multiple eyes that focused independently. The subject on the table was not human, but close. A creature with mammalian features and an exposed chest cavity. It was alive. Barely. The Reaper didn't speak. His first shot ripped through one of the doctors before it could even look up. The second dropped the other a heartbeat later. He moved forward, pulled the breathing tube from the subject's throat, and gently placed 2 fingers on its head. It blinked once, then went still. Not from violence, but from relief. That's when the system triggered containment. The doors slammed shut. A blue field locked the corridor. Lights flashed. Automated defense turrets emerged from the ceiling and fired plasma bursts at where he had just stood. But the Reaper wasn't there anymore. He was already moving, a blur of dark motion. One turret exploded. Then the other. He walked through the smoke without slowing down. The ship wasn't prepared for him. It had never expected something so specific, so primal. It had calculated aggression, but not grief. It had predicted retaliation, but not the kind that walks in with a loaded heart and no leash. He passed chambers with observation windows. Inside, floating capsules filled with pale blue liquid, he saw infants from across the galaxy. Some alive. Some not. Some simply preserved, eyes open and unaware. One capsule held a human baby. Or what was left of it. A small arm. A face partially reconstructed. The Reaper stood there for a moment. He didn't scream. He didn't break the glass. He just memorized the face. Then he moved on. The next door led to the archive. It was a library of experiments, rows of crystal-like memory cores that lit up as he approached. He activated one by touch. It showed a recording, a conference between alien researchers, speaking in their emotionless cadence. One said that humans showed the highest emotional recoil of all species studied. Another said that Earth was too volatile for diplomacy, but too biologically rich to ignore. A third suggested using indirect samples, such as children, to prevent full species engagement. The final statement, translated into English, read: primitive cultures require sharp instruction. They'll respond once they lose enough. He smashed the core. Not from anger, but from certainty. There would be no trial. No more warnings. He found the bridge control through the security feeds, but he also saw something else. A nursery. Not a lab. A room filled with warm light and gravity balance, where only one being floated, cradled in magnetic fields. A child. But not fully human. Its skin was faintly scaled, its eyes silver. Hybrid. Born not from surgery, but intention. The Reaper watched it blink slowly. It didn't cry. It reached toward the screen, unaware of what its own existence meant. He changed direction. When he entered the nursery, no alarms went off. No guards waited. Only silence. The child turned toward him, no fear in its expression. He hesitated for the first time. This wasn't a target. This was a mistake-given breath. It floated closer. He reached out, and it grabbed his finger with impossibly small hands. He took a long breath. Then he wrapped the child in the interior lining of his suit and cradled it against his chest. When he left Sector Grey, the alarms were no longer active. He had passed through their fear threshold. The ship's artificial intelligence recognized the flaw in its own programming. It had allowed something in that couldn't be reasoned with. No logic would stop what had begun. The ship's automated voice tried one last message as he entered the main corridor. You are not authorized. Surrender. Biological compromise detected. He didn't answer. He fired a round into the control panel and kept walking. He reached the central elevator shaft and took it without activating the lift. He used his boots, climbing up cable by cable, one hand holding the hybrid child. Above him, the council room awaited. The bridge was broadcasting to deep space, pleading for assistance. He could hear the language in his earpiece. This vessel has been compromised by a non-diplomatic life form. Threat level unknown. Damage escalating. requesting emergency tribunal. By the time the elevator hatch opened, the messages had stopped. Every eye on the bridge turned as he walked in, cradling the child. One alien stood and said, "This is a place of discourse." He laid the child gently onto a padded table beside him, then drew his knife. "This isn't a discussion," he said. "This is delivery." They backed away. One tried to raise a defense shield. He threw the knife into its throat before the sentence ended. The rest froze. He picked up the child again and walked toward the Council Command Core. A small orb, pulsing softly. It was the ship's brain. With one slow, deliberate movement, he drew his pistol and pressed it against the orb. He whispered one word into it. "Remember." Then he pulled the trigger. The ship didn't explode. It didn't collapse or erupt into flames. It simply stopped. The lights faded from white to blue, then to a dim pulse like a heartbeat slowing in its final moments. Gravity loosened. The walls no longer vibrated with life. Somewhere in its central core, systems bled out code and power one circuit at a time. The Reaper stood in the quiet, the hybrid child nestled against him, watching as the council members looked around like cornered animals. One of them stumbled forward and said something in its native tongue, an appeal or maybe a negotiation. He didn't respond. He wasn't interested in words anymore. Through the shattered silence of the bridge came a slow creaking sound. It wasn't metal. It wasn't mechanical. It was the sound of fear finally catching up to people who thought they were untouchable. One alien, broader than the rest, with high-rank symbols etched into its skin, tried to regain control. It activated a projection, a hologram of Earth with sectors marked in red. It said, "Earth cannot retaliate. You are one man. Your species will die for this." The Reaper walked up to the projection, stared at the image, then pulled a grenade from his belt and placed it gently inside the console. No timer. Just a pressure trigger. He looked the alien in the eyes and said the only words they would remember. "You touched a child. Now you're going to learn what that costs." He didn't run. He didn't need to. The grenade wouldn't go off unless they tried to issue another command. They would be paralyzed in fear of their own system. That was the point. He left them in that moment of frozen powerlessness. It would last until the rescue ships arrived. If they did. He took the hybrid and walked through the halls, retracing his path. On the way out, the floating mosses in the observation garden had wilted. The lights no longer pulsed gently. The drones hovered dead in the air like forgotten bones. The ship was hollow now. It had been gutted not by violence, but by meaning. He didn't destroy it. He infected it with memory. At the edge of the hull breach, he opened the emergency hatch on the fire trail. Its internal systems had cycled into passive drift, waiting for him. When he stepped inside, it recognized his heartbeat pattern and powered up. He set the hybrid in the co-pilot's cradle, strapping it in with steady hands. The child blinked, wide-eyed and wordless, watching him like he was something more than a person. Maybe he was. Maybe not. But in that moment, with the ship behind him and the void ahead, the Reaper finally spoke again. Not to the ship. Not to the baby. Just to himself. One down. The fire trail launched with a ripple that bent light across nearby sensors. It didn't roar. It shimmered, vanishing into the folds of space-time where gravity lost its grip. It was a rogue signal now, untracked and unapproved. Its re-entry path was earthbound but unstable. The journey home would be long, and he didn't care. He sat in the command chair, not looking at the monitors, but instead at the photo he kept tucked in his armor. He placed it gently on the dashboard beside the hybrid. The child touched it once, then curled against the seat and fell asleep. Far across space, the interstellar Concorde received the distress signal. They convened a war chamber in haste. Representatives from over a dozen species arrived via virtual presence, many still confused, some skeptical. The footage that played changed everything. Not the violence. They had seen war. But the precision. The intention. One human with no translator, no ambassadorial badge, and no hesitation. The most disturbing part for them was the child. The hybrid. That one act stripped away any claim to scientific innocence. It was no longer about data. It was about theft, creation, possession. When the footage ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one voice said Earth must be warned. Another said Earth must be eliminated before it escalates. But then a third voice, older and deeper, cut through. You're missing the truth. That wasn't retaliation. That was a message. A council member asked what kind. The old voice replied the only kind humans send when they're not bluffing. And what message was that? Someone asked. The answer was simple. Don't come back. Back on Earth, in the same Montana cabin where the child was taken, the mother sat in silence. Weeks had passed. No visitors. No answers. Just reports. The official story said there was no evidence of abduction. Authorities concluded it was a tragic disappearance. A freak storm, maybe a wild animal. She didn't believe it. Not because she had proof, but because no mother forgets the moment her child is taken by light. She sat by the crib every night, not crying anymore, just waiting. Until one morning, she found something on the windowsill. Not a person. Not a knock. Just a blanket. Folded the exact way she used to fold it. Her eyes widened. She touched it. It was warm. Miles beneath the earth, in a debriefing chamber shielded from all known frequencies, the Reaper stood before a small group of men and women. They didn't ask questions. They didn't take notes. They just watched as he placed the hybrid child into the care of a silent woman in medical scrubs. She nodded once. He turned and left. One man finally dared to speak. You left the ship intact? He didn't stop walking. Just answered without turning his head. I left it ashamed. The debrief ended there. The child would be raised under close observation, monitored but not harmed. Earth wasn't ready to make a statement to the stars. But the stars now understood something very old and very human. When humans love, they protect. And when they protect, they don't wait for permission. They send one of their own. Not always a soldier. Sometimes just someone who remembers what it means to feel loss and refuses to feel it again. The Reaper didn't return to his old bunker. He didn't accept medals or take questions. He disappeared the way only someone with his clearance could. One day he was seen at a cemetery in the mountains. A new grave had been dug. The name on the headstone was blank. Just a date. The date of the disappearance. He sat there for an hour, then carved a word into the stone using a combat knife. The word was not vengeance. It was not justice. It was promise. As the sun dipped below the ridge, a soft wind picked up. Snow began to fall. In the distance, a wolf howled. The man stood, adjusted the strap of his rucksack, and walked into the trees. No path. No witness. Just a legend returning to the shadows, where warnings live and monsters wait their turn. The stars above blinked silently, but none dared come closer. Because now they understood. Earth was no longer sleeping. And it had long memories. He hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since the return. Not since the debrief ended in silence, and he handed the hybrid over to Earth's handlers. The Reaper had vanished the same way he'd arrived, quiet, unstoppable, and unseen by anyone who didn't already know he was coming. Rumors of his existence spread like wildfire through covert channels. There were whispers in dark rooms about what he had done, what he had left behind, and how the Concorde itself now refused to speak Earth's name without caution. Across the galaxy, research ships rerouted away from Earth's region. Protocols were updated. Civilizations with far more power and numbers reconsidered their curiosity. Not because of Earth's military, but because of a single human who didn't wait for permission to mourn with fury. On Earth, the hybrid child was placed into a secure compound deep within the Rocky Mountains. The scientists assigned to observe him were instructed to take no samples, ask no invasive questions, and never refer to him as a subject. His room was filled with toys. He was given sunlight through artificial skylights, and every hour of the day was shaped like normal childhood. But no matter how many languages were played to him, or how many soft voices coaxed him to speak, he never said a word. He just held the photograph of the human baby. The one he had seen in the hands of the Reaper. He carried it like a memory he never made, but somehow understood. When he looked at it, something flickered in his silver eyes. Not pain. Not confusion. Just recognition. One night the lights in the compound went out for exactly 7 seconds. When they returned, no alarms had been triggered, no security breached. But the photo was gone. In its place was a folded scrap of paper with coordinates. A single phrase was scratched into the corner. "He's safe now. Do not follow." They didn't. The paper was incinerated, and the story was buried beneath layers of red tape and bureaucratic fog. Even the handlers stopped asking questions. Earth had always buried its myths in silence, and this one was no different. Except this time, the stars were watching too. Somewhere far from cities and satellites, the Reaper built a cabin with his own hands. No drones. No prefab materials. Just wood and stone and the kind of patience only someone who had lived through war and come out uncelebrated could possess. The hybrid boy sat on the porch every morning, his feet dangling above the dirt, watching birds with the quiet stillness of someone who had never quite trusted noise. The Reaper didn't teach him to speak. He taught him how to read weather patterns in the clouds. How to walk through a forest without leaving a sound. How to sharpen a blade without cutting too deep. The boy learned it all without needing to ask. When he finally did speak, it was only one word. Home. In the wider galaxy, the event became a case study. Alien scholars debated how one planet's unpredictable emotion could collapse a decades-long research network. Military strategists reviewed the footage of the Reaper's infiltration, analyzing every movement, every silence. They tried to find flaws in the operation. Weaknesses. But there was nothing. No blueprint to counter a man who didn't operate by calculation. One alien diplomat stated it best. Humans are not dangerous because they are violent. They are dangerous because they grieve with purpose. Back on Earth, the child's existence remained unacknowledged. No announcements. No integration plans. Not even a file in official archives. But word of him reached deep places. Places where others had once whispered of Roswell, and anomalies and strange signals. Those voices began to shift tone. Less fear. More reverence. A few even began to suspect that the hybrid might be something new. Not a weapon. Not a warning. But a bridge. Years passed. The boy grew. The Reaper grew older, his face hardened further by time, but his steps remained steady. They never spoke of the ship again. Not the aliens. Not the baby. Not even the photograph. But every year, on the same date, they walked together through the woods to a clearing marked by a single stone. No name. No date. Just a carved line that read, "You are not forgotten." The boy would kneel and press his fingers to the stone. The Reaper would wait. And then they would walk back together in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. One morning, long after the first snowfall of the season, a small craft descended quietly in the distance. It did not trigger alarms or satellites. It bore no insignia. The Reaper watched it through binoculars and saw 2 figures exit, tall, robed, unarmed. He turned to the boy, now nearly grown. "They're here," he said. The boy nodded. Not afraid. Just ready. They walked to the clearing where the stones stood. The 2 aliens waited there, hands visible, heads bowed. They spoke not to the Reaper, but to the hybrid. "We did not know," they said. He answered in their language. "Then learn." And they did not argue. The meeting lasted 10 minutes. When the aliens left, they left behind a small box. Inside it was a sealed record of every abducted child across the stars. Their names. Their stories. Some still alive. Some not. The Reaper opened the file and handed it to the boy. "Your choice now," he said. The boy held the file to his chest and whispered something not meant for ears. That night he didn't sleep. He just sat on the porch, looking up, not in fear, but in decision. When dawn came, the boy was gone. The file was gone. Only the Reaper remained, seated on the same chair, staring into the woods like he was still waiting for something to return. But he wasn't waiting. He was remembering. And in that stillness, surrounded by the wilderness he'd chosen over war, he finally closed his eyes. He didn't dream. He didn't need to. He had finished his mission long ago. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about what happens when the universe forgets that children are not numbers, not samples, not variables. They are promises. And the Reaper had made sure that promise was kept. Years later, a legend spread quietly among explorers. Of a human boy with silver eyes who appeared on damaged ships and abandoned outposts. Who spoke every language without learning it. Who never aged. Who asked only one question before disappearing again. Did you ever hurt a child? And those who answered wrong were never seen again. Those who answered truthfully were given coordinates. Coordinates that led to safety. Or maybe to reckoning. No one was sure. But everyone remembered the word that came next. Reaper. It no longer meant death. It meant judgment. And somewhere, in a cabin no longer marked on any map, a grave sat under a tree that bloomed even in snow. A grave with no name, only a single word carved into the bark above it. Home.